Hey there, this is Steve Diamond with Living Land Permaculture Homestead, and I want to show you some slate projects I worked on. What we have right here is actually what was done by a pro before we moved in, and it's very fine grain, high quality slate. See how it's very smooth and it's grouted very nicely, and it's using small pieces in kind of an erratic pattern to use efficiently what they had on hand, and different colors and stuff. Came out kind of nicely. Impressive. So my first project was this room. Large format, slate tile, much coarser, less expensive, 16-inch square. Notice it's the coarseness means that grading is more imperfect. So the thickness of each tile varies. So it's quite a bit harder to get everything to match up just right. And grouting, it's very difficult to wash all the grout off when you're working on getting it off. I think using what they call an enhancer, a coating before you put the grout on, would make it easier to get that grout off. But also just the tiles being coarse makes it a bit harder to get it off. You really can destroy a pretty nice big sponge doing that kind of work on coarse tile. I don't regret it though. Save some money that way. And as long as it's not going to catch your foot and trip you, that's the main thing. And I think it's kind of pretty. Complicated, different colors. It's like a museum of geology going on in here. But large format was a little hard to work with. Fortunately, I'm rather strong, but it's heavy. I stopped at the closet. I might get back to that later. And anyway, so that's this room. Castle offset, what it's called, where you have a bit of a it's not square. Everything isn't square. There's an offset to make things a little stronger, a little more interesting. Then the next time I did this, I got these slate from India, actually. It's harder and harder to find this kind of material at the stores. I had to drive further. Here it is installed, and I haven't grouted this part yet. Because of the freezers, I didn't have a place to put them. I had to do this in more than one phase, actually 3 phases. So the freezers were in the middle of the room. Moved them over here. First we cleared this area, laid this tile, grouted it, then moved the freezers onto this spot that's totally done. And then I've laid this section. I had to stop. Well, I was tired because it's a lot of work. And I had to stop because I had no place to be while I do this part. Because you have to have some place to stand that's not on the tiles you just laid, because that would mess things up. You need to give a good week, depending on the instructions of your mortar, before you start walking on it. So with poorly graded tile, there were some imperfections. I did the best I could to back butter each piece as necessary. If it's a thinner piece, you back butter the tile. So you take your piece of tile, and I like using a small container so you don't have the container in the way. So you mix it up in here. You don't have to use a powered tool to get absolute perfect. I just use this. Officially, you're supposed to use something like this, and the size of the teeth determines how much thin set mortar ends up being there. So I eventually stopped doing that. I just kind of eyeballed it because there was so much variation in the thickness of the tile that getting a consistent bed of mortar was not so much an ideal that I needed. It was more important to make it inconsistent, but more correct. So by back buttering, that just means you, this is the back of the tile. It's rougher than this side. So you'd mix up mortar to the right consistency, which is a little stiff, but pretty wet. Thick enough to sort of hold a little bit of weight, but that things will sink into it. By back buttering, you spread the mortar onto the back of this, and you also prep where it's going. So that the extra thickness, see, this is a kind of a thick tile, so I wouldn't really do it on this one. I wouldn't back butter. The next one, you never know. This one's about the same, but there can be a large variation. So if it was extra thin, I would back butter a lot before I put it down. Some people talk about plastic shims, plastic spacers to get the spacing right. And I wouldn't bother with that anymore. I just use a knife to sort of get an approximately similar size. And the main problem with the grading being poor is there are a few spots where there's kind of a big transition. And it's literally set in stone, so there's not much I can do about that. I'm going to get a powerful grinder. I have a powerful grinder, and I'm going to have some masonry wheels for it. I'm going to try to take that edge off so no one can trip on that before I grout it. And then in the closet, some of the more erratic pieces that had a lot of bulge to it, I cut them smaller. And all the, if the grading doesn't have to be as perfect in the closet, that's okay. So I pieced together the random bits in here where it doesn't matter so much, so that it's I'm more efficient about my use of the slate. See this one, look at that bow. That is a lot of bow. This is the leftover bit of that. And I made sure there was plenty of mortar filling in the gap where that bow was. Anyway, those are some of the thoughts I've had on how to do slate. I think I've covered all the bases. Oh, when I finished for the day, I had to make sure that there was no extra residue in here, because I wouldn't want to be chipping that away with a chisel or ending up with a random variation in height here. And I still have to grout, and I still have to lay this bit of tile here, but it's coming along. So certainly expect to need, they say 10% overage. You should maybe order 10% more than the floor area that you're dealing with. And depending how much imperfection you're willing to tolerate, that might be a good idea. To do the cutting, I bought myself a wet saw. And it works pretty well. Actually, I didn't drain it last time. I should have. Here. Takes a little getting used to. Works pretty well. Anyway, if you have any question, post a comment. Thanks for listening.